Mecha has forever been one of the cornerstones of both anime and gaming, with its influences seen in every gaming genre you can imagine, from stealth to platformers to our topic of today, JRPGs. I've compiled a list of what I consider to be must-play games in the genre, and because mecha can be such a wide encompassing subgenre, I'm going to limit my choices to games where the mechs aren't only present, but play a key role in either the story or gameplay. Also, just know that while I have played plenty of Mecha JRPGs, I've not played every single one out there, so if you feel there's a big omission in my list, feel free to recommend it to others in the comments below. And a reminder that if you liked the video, leave a like and consider subscribing to the channel, it's a big help. With that out the way, let's talk about some must-play Mecha JRPGs. Let's start off with the epitome of a hidden gem. Front Mission 3 was the first game in the series to be localized here in the West and has challenging, strategic gameplay where you control mechs known as Wanzers to wipe out enemies and complete objectives like keeping an important NPC alive. A really cool feature is that you can actually get out of your mech and not only fight on foot, but hijack enemy Wanzers as well. In some ways, the gameplay of Front Mission 3 was ahead of a lot of other strategy RPGs of the time, and I think it's aged pretty well in the gameplay department. But when it comes to the other parts of the game, it's no slouch either. Front Mission 3's story takes place in the year 2112 and deals with the Cold War between two nations in Asia and all the politics that come with it. If you're a big fan of political heavy mecha anime like Gundam or Full Metal Panic, then this will be right up your alley. Early in the game, you'll actually have to make a choice between two characters to follow that drastically alters the events of the game. Some events happen the same across both routes, but overall they are very different story paths with different characters, which means there's a lot of replay value here. Recently, remakes of Front Missions 1 and 2 were confirmed for modern systems, and I hope a remake for 3 follows sometime soon as well. For this entry, I'm going to include the entire Trails of Cold Steel series. Cold Steel's 4 games are actually a smaller part of the bigger Trails series, which is currently 12 games and counting. I know that sounds super intimidating, and it is, but the first 2 Cold Steel games at the very least can be played on their own without knowledge of the others, and you'd likely know by that point if you want to go back to the older games to get the most of the newer ones. If you want to take the plunge, just know it's worth it. But the reason I felt compelled to include Cold Steel as a series instead of choosing one particular entry is that you kinda have to. The mechs don't actually show up until the end of Cold Steel 1, and then their main stays all the way until Cold Steel 4. But you obviously need to play all of 1 to get to the latter 3. It's a time investment. But anyways, the Cold Steel games have you control Reen and his classmates in Class 7, newly enrolled students in Thor's military academy. Over the course of the games, you'll see them grow as people and get involved in events on the world stage as the stakes grow more and more with each entry. Regular battles play out in pretty typical turn-based fashion, though positioning does play a role to take it a step further. After mechs are introduced in the series, they too get their own battle system, and though it changes slightly from game to game, the core of them revolves around guessing the correct limb of the enemy mech to target in order to maximize damage, on top of managing EP, which is basically your fuel. These battles are a nice change of pace from normal ones, and when they do happen, there's usually a pretty plot significant reason for it, making them all the more special. The Cold Steel games and the Trails series as a whole are time investments, but the more time you put in them, the more you're likely to get out. So don't be afraid to give them a try. It wouldn't be a Mecha JRPG list without a Gundam game, and the one that immediately came to mind is CrossRace, the latest entry in the G Generation subseries of ST Gundam games. Unlike other RPGs on today's list, this one isn't really story-based. There are stories here that let you relive key moments from various Gundam series, but the main appeal is building your own dream roster of mobile suits from various Gundam universes. That and the visually impressive animations that never get old. There's over 1,000 mobile suits to buy, evolve older mechs into, or even steal from enemies. This is definitely one of those games where you get a lot more out of it if you're already a fan of the source material, but I think even those unfamiliar with Gundam can get some enjoyment out of the turn-based strategy combat and just the ridiculous amount of cool mechs there are to discover. Now let's switch over to a Gundam RPG that actually has a plot with original characters and can be enjoyed by anyone. I didn't even know MS Saga: A New Dawn existed until a few years back, and when I discovered it, I had to play and stream it immediately. Main character Tristan is living a happy, carefree life in an orphanage with his best friend Fritz, when mobile suits from Gundam suddenly race the orphanage down. And of course from there, the two set out to find out why this happened. I think the thing I like most and found most unique about New Dawn is that it doesn't feel like an RPG catered to Gundam fans only. It feels like they made an RPG and then partway through development added Gundams. And that's not to say the Gundams feel out of place, far from it. It's just apparent there'd be a solid RPG here even without them. But the mobile suits are here and they add a lot to the gameplay and world. Battles are done in typical turn-based fashion, but you get to customize the mechs your party members ride in, changing their weaponry, body parts, and color. It's really cool seeing your own personalized party come together over the course of the game, and there's even major secret Gundams in the world you can take on to add to your arsenal, like the fan favorites Burning Gundam and Gundam Death Scythe. Just know the game can have some brutal difficulty spikes here and there. Don't let the cutesy, colorful presentation fool you. This game gave me some of the biggest challenges I've faced in any RPG. But despite this, it was still a blast to play through, and it's one I'd recommend to anyone with even the slightest interest. Just putting it bluntly, Xenoblade X is a contender for having my favorite world to explore of any game I played in my life. And this is coming from someone that tends to not like open world games. It's a standalone entry from the rest of the Xenoblade games, so there's no prerequisite stopping you from jumping right in. You know, besides having to own a Wii U. Earth has been destroyed and the last few survivors crash land on a distant alien planet. And now it's up to you not to only find out all you can about the planet, but fend off the aliens that chase you here from Earth. More so than the other Xenoblade games, X puts a heavy emphasis on exploration. For the first portion of the game, you do this on foot, but you will eventually unlock mechs for your characters called Skells that completely change the way you see the world. Instead of having to run and swim, you can now drive across terrain and even take to the skies to explore and discover secrets in the world in an entirely different plane. In the 100 plus hours I put into Xenoblade X, I never got tired of exploring the world, and that's not something I can say for many games. We can't talk about Mecha JRPGs without talking about the longest running Mecha JRPG franchise. Super Robot Wars has been going for 30 plus years and is the quintessential crossover series for any fan of mecha anime. These games take a slew of series like Code Geass, Gurren Lagann, Gundam, Macross, and put them all together in one cohesive story-driven strategy RPG. And these aren't your typical throwaway crossover plots either. The devs go to painstaking lengths to make them all work in the universe the game is set in, and it has to be played to be believed that so many different shows can work so well together to tell a focused and gripping story. If you're at all familiar with the channel, you know how extensively I covered the series in the past, and that I could be here all day going over the details in this expansive series. But if you've never heard of this series and want to know more, I suggest checking out the video in the description, where I go into extensive detail on why it's such a big deal and very much worth your attention. In the meantime, if I have to suggest specific games to play, it would be either Super Robot Wars V, since it's a great modern entry and is available on several modern platforms, or Super Robot Wars Original Generations on the PS2. This game got an English patch some time ago and is the updated duology of the two phenomenal games that I and many others were introduced to the series with, though do know it only has completely original characters in it. Regardless of where you start, if you like mecha anime and or strategy RPGs, you need to play Super Robot Wars. Since we just talked about Super Robot Wars, let's talk about a recent game heavily inspired by it. Relay is an original IP where in the not so distant future, mankind makes contact with hostile aliens and it's up to the Star Children, humans with special powers that embody the wills of the stars, to stop them. This game is the epitome of an overlooked hidden gem. It came out earlier this year at probably the worst possible time, being immediately after Horizon Forbidden West and Elden Ring. So it should be no surprise that it wasn't on anyone's radar. But those that did play were greeted with a surprisingly good strategy RPG. I said it was inspired by Super Robot Wars, but honestly what it reminded me of more gameplay wise was actually Fire Emblem. The more slow and methodical strategy or positioning can be important. There aren't many of them for each weapon type, but the animations that each mech has with any weapon equipped all look pretty amazing and give the game some appreciated visual flair. If you want to try the game yourself, there's a long demo of it out on PSN, and when I say long, I mean long, like over 10 hours long, so don't be afraid to give it a try. You likely won't regret it. Out of every game on today's list, 13 Sentinels is without a doubt the most unique. Now, let me be upfront and say that 13 Sentinels has a lot going on, from being part visual novel to being part real-time strategy game, along with a plethora of things it tackles, so some may question if it even is an RPG, but I wholeheartedly see it as one and think that it more than deserves to be here. Now, like I said, there's a lot going on in 13 Sentinels, and even describing it is kinda a tall order, especially since I absolutely refuse to give any of the game's big reveals away. Just know you control 13 separate characters, each with their own stories, and you will be confused at first. But when things come together in your head and the game is so expertly written that it'll all click and you'll be left with one of the most unique experiences you've ever had with any game out there. This is one of those once in a generation games that must be played, and honestly, my praise here isn't even scratching the surface on doing it justice. Just play 13 Sentinels. Alright, ladies and gentlemen, here we are at the final game. This list was in no particular order, but I definitely did save the best for last. If you're at all familiar with me, then you likely know that Xenogears is my favorite game of all time, and for good reason. This game that served as a catalyst for the future Xenosaga and Xenoblade games is without a doubt the most ambitious RPG ever made, and has my personal favorite story told in all of fiction. Heavy themes of religion, a heavy influence of psychology, and of course a focus on mechs make up some of the building blocks of this must-play RPG. You start the game with Faye, a young man with no memories of his childhood, and after some insane events are cast into the world to not only find out the truth about yourself, but to unravel the very secrets of the origin of how the world itself came to be and what role Faye has in that. I wish I could go into more detail here, but just like 13 Sentinels, this is one of those games that needs to be experienced firsthand for yourself. At a glance, the combat in Xenogears may look like your standard turn-based fare, but the game actually puts a heavy emphasis on combo attacks. You have access to light, medium, and strong attacks just like a fighting game, and inputting buttons in a specific sequence together gives you access to death blows. Flashy combo attacks that not only do big damage, but can be chained together multiple times. And every death blow a character learns translates to a death blow inside their mechs, called gears, as well. In fact, the mech battles that we touched on earlier in the Trails of Cold Steel games take heavy inspiration from the ones in Xenogears. The gears actually play a massive role in the story of Xenogears, but as I said before, I dare not spoil it for anyone. I could go on and on about how special a game this is, but don't just take my word for it. Try this timeless game for yourself and understand why myself and so many others hold it in the highest regard. I hope you enjoyed this peek into some great Mecha JRPGs and came out of it interested in trying something new. If you want more RPG content, consider checking out this video I made for Video Game Fables, a phenomenal indie RPG that completely shattered my expectations. Remember to like and subscribe if you haven't, leave your thoughts down in the comments below, and I'll see you guys next time.